Thanks, Michael. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a privilege to be with you, Ranjana. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Kausik.
As Michael said, it's a forecast conference, so let's start out with the easy question. What are your economists telling you about the global and national economy forecasts, and how do you see that impacting the Bay Area?
So, we all read the same news. I think if the stock market is to be believed globally, I think a lot of optimism about the year ahead, if we believe it's a leading indicator. Unemployment is at a record low at 4.1%. I think if you pause there, I think what gives us pause is the fact that we're about to enter the 10th year of an economic expansion. I think the recession ended in June of 10 years ago. And so I think when you sort of put that all together, I think we're supposed to close out the year at around 2.3%, accelerating to 2.7 or 2.8% next year. Not quite the 3% that the Trump administration hopes for. I think they anticipate that it'll go to 3% by 2020 and then continue at that pace for the next 10 years. Our economists are a little less bullish on that number. I think they still have a two-handle on that growth rate going forward. I think if you bring it in particular to, so globally, I think, our view is that it is pretty much a Goldilocks environment right now. Our parent company, MUFG, even Japan is growing after many decades. Europe is growing. Many parts of Asia are growing. I think the economy really to watch is China. I think the real estate situation there. So I think so bringing it down to the Bay Area. Nothing profound. I think Jim started with some of that. We'll talk hopefully more about technology. I think that's a big part of the economy here. I think housing is a big issue. I think that puts some storm clouds and record low unemployment puts some storm clouds in sort of the future growth and productivity. But in general, a great place to be with very highly qualified workers that really plays into the next phase of what will drive growth in this economy, which is really sort of the new technologies which will fuel true productivity growth.
So as Jim noted, tax reform was not carefully designed to be in favor of California and the Bay Area. What implications do you see for California and the Bay Area economy? On the one hand, you had the corporate tax rate reduction. On the other hand, the end of the SALT reduction. How does that all net out as you think about it?
Yeah, I think that we live in sort of an ecosystem, which is the entire country here. So if you look at the consumer, what's happening to the consumer, which is where a lot of the we talk about the SALT deductions being going away. I think in the short run, it will put with some withholding going down in the coming quarters, it will put more money, more cash in the hands of consumers nationwide, and I think we should see some of that here as well. Going forward, I am told that $675,000, I think the math is still being done, is sort of the break-even in terms of what the reduction in the rate, the federal rate does, versus the deductions being phased out. But, for higher earners, I think it's going to mean higher taxes on a net basis, 8 to 10%, depending on sort of the range you're in. With regard to corporate taxes, I think that maybe we look at it in sort of two buckets and certainly bring it to the Bay, dial it back to what it means for us in the Bay Area here. But there is sort of, the large taxpayers. So and then we'll talk about sort of the smaller businesses. You know, the large taxpayers, if we can just use sort of Apple's announcement yesterday as Exhibit A. So I think there are sort of four things that they said. They said many things, but you know, there's sort of four main things. One, 38 billion in taxes one time as a result of the repatriation benefit that they will get. And there are many of you know, companies like that. And I think the question will be, will we, as a country, reinvest that in infrastructure? Or what will we do with that one-time windfall? For Apple itself, you know, $38 billion, they said they're going to spend, you know, $30 billion in capital investment, including, I believe, 10 million in new data center, create 20,000 jobs, not within the company, but within the ecosystem that they have, which is a pretty small number, actually, given the app economy that supports them. And, you know, they will increase from 1 billion to 5 billion the size of a fund that they've created to promote sort of advanced manufacturing. I think the question is, were they going to do that anyway? I think the supposition is that all that was already in the works. It is very much run rate for Apple given its growth. But, you know, are they packaging it for sort of political impact? And so if you go from there and you say, you know, sort of where the biggest sort of taxpayers are and where some of these impacts are, it's technology, healthcare, and the consumer businesses. You know, I think the jury is out whether this is really a sort of net impact in terms of reinvesting for driving growth, or is it going to be, you know, dividended out and, you know, share buybacks and so on. Some of the larger companies are the smartest managers of, or thought to be the smartest managers of capital structure, and so the supposition is that they will do more of that, more of the latter. You know, with regard to small businesses, I think that it is an you know, an improvement for them, and so I think those dynamics will play out in the Bay Area as well, in terms of sort of the larger companies and what we think it'll mean for them versus the smaller players.
So you referenced technology, and it'd be great to get your thoughts on what you see as some of the most important technology advancements, and particularly in your business. How do you see technology impacting banking as we go forward?
So, a quick background, I run a business called Transaction Banking in the Americas, which is essentially 3 businesses in 3 geographies. I run the cash management or treasury management business, trade finance, so those are really working capital management businesses. And the third business is a global trust services business, which helps companies with asset servicing. So if you start with sort of the businesses and the clients are really driven by their needs. And what we hear from them are really very uniformly 4 things that they say they have been pursuing for some time now. They want to streamline, they want to automate, they want to integrate. And many of them are going global, whether it's with, you know, small sales offices overseas or procurement. And this has been a secular trend. It's really not a cyclical trend. But in terms of, you know, what we are hearing, certainly investment in technology and automation is very much on their minds, particularly in the businesses that I'm in. And I'll use just an example. So last month I was calling on clients in Texas, so, you know, a lot of the energy space, oil and gas, energy and power, to a person. And again, you know, I know that they were having this conversation with me, but to a person, they are looking at robotic process automation as driving sort of that near-term wave of productivity improvement. You know, a lot of them have put in other types of automation in front end and so on, but that is something that we're hearing more about. But investment in technology is really front and center for many of them.
And last year at this conference, I think we had a pretty robust debate about automation and broader impact on jobs. Where do you see that going? Are you a glass half full or glass mostly empty as you think about automation and its future impact on employment?
You know, I'm an eternal optimist. So whichever the good version is, I think it's glass half full, right? I always forget. But, you know, I believe that it will be a net positive. So, you know, if you sort of if you take the long view and then take the short view. If you take the long view, you know, big shifts in employment have occurred with the agricultural revolution, with manufacturing. So many of the jobs have moved out of, you know, manufacturing. And through all those waves, we've always said, gee, you know, I remember reading a position paper FDR published in the 60s that said, you know, automation is going to kill jobs. And, you know, it led to a huge expansion and so on. So, you know, I think that what makes this one different is really the fact that it's going, and maybe different for us when we're looking at the last 30 or 40 years, but in the long horizon, I don't know that it's so different in that there will be jobs lost, but I think jobs will be created, and the skills needed to be to succeed in the future will assuredly be different. It'll be, you know, things that require higher levels of education, you know, more emotional, more social skills, things that cannot be readily automated away. So, you know, I think will that be a period of dislocation? I don't think I'm, you know, Pollyanna-ish to believe that that will not occur. That will occur. That will have unequal impact in different parts of the country. I think that it will create some additional inequality, which from a social standpoint is very disturbing. But I think in the long term, the long game is positive.
You mentioned China earlier. Talk a little bit about China, particularly with the global vantage point you have in your businesses, and what are the big things that you see emerging from the way in which China will evolve economically?
Well, you know, I think that maybe 3 or 4 things. Certainly, they've been doing it for a while, which is a huge investment in infrastructure. You know, I think that sort of without going too deep into this topic, it is unusual for us to see a country that is so capitalist country that's not a democracy, that is a, you know, communist country. So for us in the West, I think we have a very hard time dealing with that. You know, second is the rise of the middle class. You know, I think that for a lot of them, life will be better. And, you know, it has been getting better. The rural to urban migration is a huge thing for them. It will, you know, if we believe sort of the demographics and the trends, it will, you know, at some point be the richest country in the world. You know, I think that on a per capita basis, the question for me that's still out there is whether China will get rich before it gets old, given its demographic challenges. But, you know, for now, we see that growth is accelerating after some period of slowdown. Whether that's sustainable, I think there's a real question out there.
So we're here at the Federal Reserve, which is the monopoly issuer of fiat currency. And all around us in the Bay Area, over the last several years, several other monopoly issuers of unique currencies ranging from Bitcoin. We now count more than 1,400 different variations of coin that have been issued. And related to that, there's also been a lot of discussion about blockchain technology, which is the digital register that underpins it. What are your thoughts on, maybe start with blockchain and crypto assets, if you'd like to offer a view?
Certainly will offer a view. You know, I have a very simple Simon way of thinking about this because there's so much out there that we need to read and learn. The space is so deep that, you know, when you really get into it, in a few hours your head hurts. And so to me, a simplifying construct is that there is cryptocurrency and then there's the underlying distributed ledger technology, just sort of the DLT technology that is about, you know, creating trust and transparency and decentralization, right? But what is still being worked through is cost and speed. It's not scalable from that standpoint, but there's a ton of experimentation going on in different places in different ways. A lot of smart people are working on it. Right now, it's still experimental. So as I think about it, to me, if we talk about sort of cryptocurrency itself, sort of the Bitcoin or Ethereum or any one of these, I don't think that those are ready for prime time. I think that on a worldwide basis, since we're sitting in the halo Federal Reserve, the issuer of fiat currency, I think a dollar is a dollar because, not because that piece of paper is worth much, but it's because the United States government and the Federal Reserve said a dollar is a dollar, and that's pretty much true around the world. I think the evolution away from that is, in my view, a generation away. How short that generation is, can be up for debate. But I think that is going to, see some booms and busts and a lot more experimentation that needs to occur before that is ready for prime time. But with regard to distributed ledger technology itself, the blockchain technology itself, I think that truly is revolutionary. A lot of companies are experimenting with it. We are experimenting with it. I think in the short term, short to medium term, I think the first few applications of it will be in the supply chain space, the logistics space. Healthcare is probably a little more out there. Sort of just talking about banking. What we see. There's a lot that's going on. The Singapore government, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, they have a live pilot going on using distributed ledger technology in sort of automating the supply chain around trade. Domestic trade as well as global trade. Just think about how document heavy that process is and how much efficiency can occur, and reducing time as well if you sort of squeeze that out. There's a new one that's being spun up today by, as we speak, by the HKMA Hong Kong Monetary Authority. We, MUFG, Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group, we are participating in that. We just completed, as a bank, a pilot here in the U.S. using our Trade 360 front-end platform and just a DLT protocol called Brackets. So we are all experimenting, but I do think that in the supply chain space, that technology will be revolutionary.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We are now tracking more than 70 distinct use cases where there's proofs of concept or pilots on blockchain being conducted across the world. And it's probably fair to say that Bitcoin is an excellent example of why computer science and economics are separate majors in college. Let's go to the audience for a couple of questions.
Great, absolutely. Do we have any questions? And thank you for filling our contractual obligation in January 2018 of mentioning blockchain, which every public event must do. So we appreciate that.
We aim to please your Michael.
Do we have questions for the speakers? And please introduce yourself when you ask your question.
Thank you. I am Dale Kay. I'm CEO of Innovation Tri-Valley Leadership Group, and looking at the impact of national and global trends in the Bay Area, it's pretty amazing what we're seeing all over the Bay Area. But we work a lot on workforce development, work a lot with the education community, and I wonder if you have any suggestions. I know this is not necessarily in your realm, but how we train this 21st century workforce, how we get educators to be as nimble as business, which is not always easy. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, like how we get anybody to understand what blockchain is.
Do you want me to?
Yeah. Please.
Okay. So, I think that I now see that my daughter is sitting back there, and my advice to her when she graduated from a college that's on a farm down the road here, is that really your education begins the day you get your degree. My view is that, we are beyond thinking about sort of one phase of life where we study and another phase of life where we work or monetize our learning. I believe that our system will need to change to have certainly more mid-career training, but also that we will have a series of mini degrees, if you will, or mini certifications that each of us and the future workforce is going to need to embrace. And how I think companies have a real responsibility in that. And I also think that, whether it's governments or other enterprises I think it's going to be a collective effort. I know that, in higher education, a lot of minds are thinking about that. I sit on the board of Haas, which is Berkeley's business school. I've been on other boards of colleges and universities before. I think it's really a joint responsibility to do that. But again, in my simple mind, I think of many degrees. Don't just think, I walked out with that cap and gown and this is done.
Great. We got a question over here.
My name is Ed Del Bacaro, Transwestern. So my question is, how much is, if at all, GDP numbers or productivity numbers not catching automation and artificial intelligence in their numbers?
I think when you say not catching, you mean that there are
Underestimating.
puts and takes behind it?
Underestimating.
Yeah, I think that, Kausik, you may have a better informed view around that. If you listen to, Janet Yellen or other people who talk more broadly about it, I think what they would say is that productivity growth has not seen a big spike in the United States. And you would think that if automation and some of these technologies are having a big impact today, that in fact that would be the case. I think that here in the United States, we have seen automation happen inexorably over time, and it's been a secular move. So it's kind of like, frog in boiling water. It's kind of, the temperature has been going up slowly versus, here is robotics and here is AI, and some of those technologies obviously haven't reached prime time. The true impact, I think that, certainly RPA in the near term, but I think a big automation enhancer will be artificial intelligence, which will truly, I think we will see the real impact in a few years when, deep learning, is here. It's really not here. There are a lot of people doing smaller things, but over time, I believe that will have a big impact.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I'd add from what our Global Institute looks at, there is probably a stair step coming, because what the nature of automation and RPA, as Ranjana was describing, is still locked into existing legacy processes, infrastructure, and ways of working. So as an example, if you take something that is historically a classic knowledge worker task, like closing the books, a finance controller's job, our view today is that job cannot be fully automated, but large parts of it can be. So what you're seeing is that, and we believe that more than half of economic activity today can be automated, but only a very small percentage of jobs, less than 5%, can be fully automated. So to your point, you don't see it until you get that kind of stair step.
Great, let's do one more question to keep the program rolling.
Hi, Matt Middlebrook with Airbnb. Do you have thoughts in terms of the impacts, near-term or long-term, of immigration policies?
Small question.
Small question. Where do we go with that? I think that I think in the short term, there is a lot of hype. In the long term, I think, if there's political change, then those policies might change too. I think that if you look at what has really driven the supernormal performance of the United States over the last many years, over really the last century, and compare it to a country like Japan and see why we exceeded, it's because of immigration. Absent that, our demographics are not hugely different, but it's because we have had a culture of openness and bringing in, people and knowledge workers, which requires creating sort of the soft infrastructure as well as the hard infrastructure. That's what's driven the exceptional performance, I'm going to say, of the U.S. economy. If that stops or slows down, and immigration, we can go in a lot of different ways on that, but if we are talking about sort of, knowledge workers and workers that then need to fill in for, other tasks, I think a shutdown of that spigot will have an impact. But, I'm not here to comment on policy. Again, in the long term, I think the long term is long term, and I think these policies, in my view, will rationalize over time.
All right, should we close?
Yeah, absolutely. Please join me in thanking. Please join me in waiting for the closing question, and then thank
Well,
you
I
for
thought since
mentioning
it was a
housing.
forecast conference and we opened with a short-term forecast, I didn't want to ask you for a long-term forecast. One prediction from you for 2025. It could be on economics, U.S., global, it could be on automation, which we talked about.
Well, I'll just close up with a comment I already made. I think that artificial intelligence and its true impact will, in the 2025 timeframe, really begin to have true impact in driving productivity growth in our economy and our country.
Great. Thank you, Ranjana.